Week 15 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I have as sleepers this week. The first kicker, Harrison Mevis of the Los Angeles Rams. Out there in tons of leagues and 84%. And Mevis, he's been solid since they signed him a few weeks ago. And Joshua Carty couldn't get the job done. So the last few games for Mevis, Week 12 versus Tampa, 13. Week 13 at Carolina, 4. And Week 14 at Arizona, 9 fantasy points. So this week, a middle-of-the-pack matchup in terms of fantasy points to kickers. The Lions give up the 17th most points to kickers. But this week's going to be a high-scoring game. Los Angeles back home once again, and you can't beat an indoor game for a kicker. So when you're on a high-powered offense, I know at times only extra points might be available for Mevis in this game. But I think this week there'll be some field goal attempts as well, where this Detroit defense is bend but don't break at times. So he's definitely a sleeper this week. The next kicker, Andy Rogowis, New England Patriots. So Rogowis on a high-powered offense, obviously with this Patriot team. He's out there in 86% of fantasy leagues and 3 games in a row now with double-digit fantasy points for Rogowis. Week 11 versus the Jets, 10. Week 12 at Cincinnati, 17. And Week 13 versus the Giants, 15. So we know this New England Patriot team, they're putting points on the board. They got a lot of confidence in Rogowis. He could kick that 50-plus yard field goal, even though majority of the kickers nowadays make it look easy from 50-plus yards. But Rogowis, when you're in a high-powered offense and getting many opportunities, and this week in a cold-weather game where it might be tough to throw consistently down the field, they might have to settle for some field goals, even though the wind could be a factor as well in this game. I think Rogowis will get opportunities, and so far this season, it looks like he's already acclimated to the bad weather over there in Gillette Stadium kicking the football. So this week with those factors, I have him as a sleeper option, and he's out there in 86% of fantasy leagues. And the final kicker, Riley Patterson of the Miami Dolphins. So Patterson's been on this sleeper list the last few weeks, and he hasn't disappointed going off matchups, and that's why he's been successful. Week 11 versus Washington, 11. Week 13 versus New Orleans, 14. And Week 14 at the Jets, 13 fantasy points. So this week, another good matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. They give up the 8th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And Riley Patterson has a big boot. I know this week it is a cold weather game, most likely at Pittsburgh. And this Miami Dolphin team, they don't respond well or play well in the cold weather. But Patterson, like I said, he's been great over the last 3 weeks here. And any team within the top 10 giving up fantasy points, he's had double-digit fantasy points versus those teams, except one game this season. So I think, once again, those stats favor Patterson. They're 95% of fantasy leagues. That's a few kickers I have as sleepers for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.